Grace worked quietly, gliding across the marble floors of the mathematics building at Harvard like a shadow. Every evening, after the last lecture had emptied the halls and the echoes of chalk on blackboards faded into silence, she came with her mop, her bucket, and a rickety cart of supplies. The scent of bleach followed her like perfume, but she never seemed to mind. Grace had cleaned this building for 7 years. She didn't talk much. People barely noticed her. She noticed everything. Each classroom told her a story, half-erased equations, empty coffee cups, chairs nudged slightly askew. She could tell which professors paced while they spoke and which ones sat on the desk and talked softly. She'd learned to tell the difference between undergraduate scrawl and the meticulous, almost angry handwriting of doctoral candidates. But her favorite was room 304. That was where Professor Elliot taught. Room 304 always felt alive, even long after the lecture had ended. The boards were filled with mathematical problems so complex they looked like an alien language to most. But not to Grace. Not to Grace. It started innocently, years ago. She'd pause while cleaning, staring at the chalkboards longer than necessary. At first, she just admired the symmetry of the symbols, the clean rhythm of the logic. But one night, out of quiet curiosity, she picked up a piece of chalk. There was an equation on the board, one that had been partially erased. She didn't know what possessed her, but her hand moved like it remembered something she didn't know she knew. The numbers and symbols came together like a melody she'd heard long ago in a dream. When she stepped back, she'd finished the proof. And then she erased it. She did it again the next week. A new equation. A deeper one. Each time, she felt her chest swell, not with pride, but with recognition. Like her brain had been asleep for years and someone had just turned on the light. She didn't tell anyone. Who would believe her? She was a high school dropout, a single mom once, a woman who scrubbed floors and kept her head down. But something had been waking up inside her. Grace began to spend more and more time in room 304. She'd clean it first, then linger. She'd study the equations like they were sacred scripture. Over time, she started to bring books, ones she borrowed from the library in secret. Abstract algebra. Topology. Game theory. She devoured them in the small hours, lying on her cot in the single-room apartment she rented above a bakery in Allston. By day, she was invisible. But by night, she was someone else. Professor Elliot had noticed the chalk. At first, he thought one of his students was sneaking in to solve the bonus problems he left as challenges. But when he asked around, no one claimed it. He began to leave more complex equations. The kind that, realistically, only a handful of mathematicians in the country could solve. Each time, he came back to find the problem elegantly, correctly completed. With a modest little square symbol at the end, the mathematical signature for QED, it was like a ghost haunting his classroom. A very intelligent ghost. One evening, Elliot stayed late. He had no particular plan. He was simply curious, troubled, even. There was brilliance here, and he couldn't explain it. It didn't feel like a prank. It felt purposeful. So he waited. Lights off. Sitting quietly in the back corner of room 304. The cleaning woman came in around 9. She didn't notice him. Or, if she did, she pretended not to. He watched as she cleaned, careful and methodical. She wiped the whiteboards, emptied the trash, mopped the floor. Then she paused. Picked up a piece of chalk. Walked to the board. And began to write. Elliot sat frozen. He was watching a symphony pour out of her, mathematics so intricate and fluid, it was like watching someone dance. She paused occasionally, tilted her head, then revised a line or two with elegant precision. She didn't write with hesitation. She wrote with certainty. Like someone who had spent her whole life doing this. When she finally set the chalk down and stepped back, he spoke. "I've been wondering who you were." Grace turned sharply, the color draining from her face. Her eyes widened in terror. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be touching anything, I just. Don't, Elliot said softly, standing. Don't apologize. That proof, that's the K-group conjecture we've been chewing on for 6 months. She blinked. I didn't mean, I just thought it looked interesting. You thought it looked interesting? His voice cracked, not in mockery, but in awe. Do you realize what you've done? Grace lowered her gaze. Her hands were trembling. I just solve things. In my head. Always have. Since I was a girl. But I never finished school. Life got hard. He stepped closer. Not too close. What's your name? Grace. Grace, he repeated, almost like it was an answer to a question he hadn't yet asked. The room fell into silence, thick and electric. Grace stood at the front of the classroom, mop in one hand, chalk dust on the other. And in that moment, Professor Elliot knew one thing with absolute certainty. He had just discovered a genius. Professor Elliot didn't sleep that night. After Grace left, he remained in room 304, staring at the board. Her proof was not just correct, it was original. Elegant. The kind of mathematical insight that wasn't taught, it was felt. He copied it down in his notebook, then sat back and tried to remember the last time he had seen that kind of intuitive genius. Maybe never. The next morning, he walked into the dean's office without an appointment. There's someone you need to meet, he said. A student, the dean asked. No, Elliot said. A janitor. The dean raised an eyebrow, but Elliot was firm. I want her to audit my graduate seminar. Just once. You'll see. Grace refused the offer at first. She didn't trust it. Life had never handed her anything without a cost. She'd seen people pretend to be kind before, always with conditions attached. So when Elliot came to her little apartment with a folder of documents and a desperate look in his eyes, she almost didn't let him in. You think I belong in your classroom, she said quietly, but you don't know the first thing about me. I know enough, he said. I know you're solving things my PhDs can't. I know you've taught yourself abstract number theory on your own. I know there's a gift inside you, and it deserves to be seen. She stared at the papers in his hands. I'm not some project you can feel good about, she whispered. You're not a project, Elliot replied, almost offended. You're a mathematician. That word, mathematician, felt foreign in her ears. Heavy. Dangerous. But it stirred something in her. Something long buried. Grace agreed, reluctantly, to audit one seminar. 1. When she stepped into the lecture hall, heads turned. Not because anyone knew who she was, but because she didn't belong. Her clothes were faded and plain. Her hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. She sat in the back corner, silent. Elliot didn't introduce her. He didn't need to. He presented a complex problem on the board, an unsolved algorithmic pattern relating to group symmetry. Then, without looking at her, he said, let's see if anyone has thoughts. A few students raised tentative hands. Some muttered half-formed theories. Grace said nothing. He let the room sit in silence for a while before he turned toward her. Grace. She flinched. The room turned. Would you like to share your thoughts? He asked. No, she said softly, eyes down. But something in her snapped when the smug laughter started. One of the grad students, Reed, a prodigy with a dangerous ego, smirked and leaned back in his chair. This isn't algebra, he said under his breath. Grace looked up. In 3 minutes, she stood, walked to the board, and dissected the problem with surgical grace. She used no notes, asked no questions. She just worked. The room held its breath. Even Reed. When she finished, she turned around slowly. Her voice shook. I don't know the right words for all of it, she said. But the numbers, they talk to me. Always have. The professor didn't say anything. Neither did the students. She walked out. That evening, Elliot found her waiting by the side entrance of the building. She looked embarrassed. I shouldn't have done that, she said. I don't belong there. They all know it. I've never seen a room go that quiet, he said. Grace, you do belong there. But I can't force you to see that. Her jaw clenched. I scrub toilets, Elliot. I leave behind bleach and broken backs, not theorems and publications. He took a step closer. Let me show you what you leave behind, he said. That weekend, he brought her into his office, unlocked a drawer, and handed her a thick folder. Inside were copies of the equations she'd solved. Some were problems Elliot had worked on for years. A few had stumped colleagues across Europe. He pointed to one. I sent this to Dr. Krauss in Berlin. He thought I had solved it. Grace looked up, eyes wide. I told him it wasn't me. Why? She asked, barely above a whisper. Because it wasn't, he said. It was you. She sat down, folder in her lap, hands trembling. I never got to finish school, she said after a long silence. I had a baby when I was 17. My mom kicked me out. I cleaned houses to survive. He died when he was 6. I don't talk about him much. Elliot said nothing. Just listened. I thought that part of my brain died with him, she continued. But then I found the chalk. And the quiet. And the problems. And it all started coming back. He nodded. Then it's time to bring it back fully. It took months, but Elliot helped her enroll in adult courses. Quietly, privately. She worked night shifts, studied during the day, and audited more classes. Some professors resisted. Others were curious. But none could ignore her. Grace began to bloom. The woman who once pushed a mop now pushed the boundaries of pure math. But as her world expanded, so did the tension. Reed began to resent her, publicly. The students whispered. Some questioned Elliot's judgment. Rumors swirled. One day, someone erased her proof from the board before class. Wrote, made math, in its place. Grace found it before anyone else did. She stared at it for a long time. The word burned. And then, with steady hands, she picked up the chalk, erased the slur, and rewrote the proof. In silence. Then added a second, an even harder one. This time, she signed her name. Grace. The weeks that followed were quiet on the surface, but only on the surface. Grace had become something of an unspoken legend among the graduate students. Some revered her. Others resented her. And a few, like Reed, simply could not understand her. His frustration burned deeper every time she walked into class and shattered another unsolved equation like it was child's play. One cold Friday morning, Grace arrived early to room 304. She liked the quiet before class, the stillness before minds collided. She took a seat in a corner, notebook on her lap, a half-drunk coffee beside her. Reed was already there. He didn't speak. He just watched her. When Elliot walked in and began writing on the board, Reed raised his hand. I have a question before we start, he said, turning in his seat to face Grace. Can we talk about academic integrity? The room stiffened. Elliot paused. Reed smiled, but it was a cold smile. I mean, if someone is auditing a class without credentials, and somehow they keep solving our problems, how do we know they're not just copying solutions they found somewhere else? Grace didn't move. I'm just saying, Reed went on, you can't find this stuff on Google, but you can find summaries. Enough to fake a pattern. Enough to look smart. Reed, Elliot warned, his voice sharp. No, It's okay, Grace said, rising slowly. She walked to the board without a word. Her hands shook, but her eyes did not. She uncapped a marker and began to write. Not a proof this time. A problem. A new one. Original. Frighteningly difficult. This hasn't been published, she said. It hasn't been solved. I just made it up. Right now. She turned to Reed. Why don't you solve it? The room froze. Reed stared at the board. Then at her. Then at Elliot. No one moved. After several seconds, he let out a tight laugh and mumbled, whatever, under his breath. He slouched back into his chair. Grace put the cap back on the marker. I didn't come here to be worshipped. Or insulted. I came here to think. She sat down again, her face unreadable. Later that day, Elliot found her in the faculty lounge, sitting alone at a round table, her notebook open but untouched. You didn't have to prove anything, he said. I did, she said. Not for him. For me. She looked up at him then, and there was something breaking in her eyes. I'm tired, Elliot. Tired of being stared at. Tired of feeling like a guest in a place I've come to love. He sat down across from her. I've spent most of my life cleaning up after people, she said. Now I'm making things no one understands, and they still look at me like I don't belong. You do belong, he said firmly. Do I? She asked. Because I walk out of this building and no one knows who I am. I go home to an empty apartment with a leaking sink. I fall asleep with textbooks on my chest and wake up to scrub toilets before anyone else is even awake. He reached across the table and placed a small folder in front of her. What's this? She asked. He didn't say anything. Grace opened it slowly. Inside were papers. An application. Letters of recommendation. A transcript compiled from every class she had audited. Every test she had quietly aced. At the top, the seal of the university. Harvard. You're being considered for full admission, he said. Scholarship. Housing. Full program. Grace's hands trembled. But I'm too old. I'm not. You're the best mind I've seen in 30 years, he interrupted. You don't just belong here, Grace. This place is lucky to have you. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. Why are you doing this? She whispered. Elliot leaned forward, his voice low and certain. Because once, a long time ago, someone gave me a second chance. And because what you have, this mind, this gift, it doesn't come around often. And it sure as hell doesn't care about where you were born or how you earn your living. Grace closed the folder. I don't know if I can do this, she said. You can, he said. And you will. That night, she didn't go home. She sat in room 304 until midnight, staring at the board. Thinking of her son. Of her old life. Of every door that had ever been closed to her. And then, quietly, she began to write. Not just equations, but a story. Her story. With each symbol, she carved out her place. Not in defiance. Not in rage. In truth. But the world wasn't done testing her. The next day, an anonymous email went out to the university board. It claimed that Grace had been stealing equations. That she had been secretly tutored, coached, given access to problems in advance. Someone wanted her gone. The dean summoned her for a formal review. Grace walked into the office alone. Elliot wasn't allowed in. She sat across from a panel of 3 professors, all of whom wore practiced expressions of polite concern. They showed her the email. They asked her questions. They cited academic standards. Grace answered every one. She explained her process. Her learning. Her time. Her history. And when they asked her to solve a problem on the spot, one so obscure it wasn't even published yet, she asked for a whiteboard. And within 20 minutes, she'd done it. The room went silent. One of the professors leaned back, rubbed his temples, and said, "My God." The inquiry was closed. No wrongdoing. No fabrication. No tutor. Just brilliance. Pure and terrifying. But Grace didn't walk out of that room triumphant. She walked out exhausted. She walked out changed. Spring arrived quietly that year, washing Cambridge in soft light and cherry blossoms that drifted down like confetti. Grace moved into a graduate dorm near the river, a small, quiet room with a desk by the window and a shelf just big enough to hold her notebooks. She still worked part-time in the evenings. Not because she had to anymore, her scholarship covered housing and tuition, but because she found peace in routine. The act of cleaning, of restoring order, still felt sacred to her. And some nights, when no one was watching, she'd walk past room 304 just to feel the old familiarity wrap around her. The first week of full-time classes was harder than she expected. The pace was relentless, the material brutal. Her classmates were younger, sharper in some ways, already fluent in the academic shorthand she had to fight to understand. But Grace didn't give up. She stayed late in the library. She filled page after page of her notebooks. She sat in the front row now. And when she didn't know something, she asked. Slowly, surely, the students who had once whispered about her began to lean toward her instead, quietly asking how she saw what they missed. Even Reed, eventually, changed. He caught her in the hallway one day, waiting awkwardly by the vending machine. "Hey," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "I was kind of a jerk." Grace looked at him, then smiled faintly. "Kind of." He chuckled. "Right. I deserve that." A pause. "You're amazing, you know. I didn't want to see it at first, but now I do. You belong here more than I do." Grace just nodded. "Takes more than math to prove who you are." He smiled sheepishly and walked away. But it wasn't the recognition that made her stay. It wasn't the praise or the professors who started quoting her in lectures. It wasn't even the awards she began to quietly rack up, department honors, research fellowships, invitations to speak at conferences. It was something simpler. Something deeper. One day, after a particularly brutal exam, Grace walked along the Charles River and found herself thinking of her son, Michael. He would have been 16 now. She pictured his face, the way he used to giggle when she read him stories, how he once drew a picture of her holding the sun in her hand and called it, "Mama, the light." She sat on a bench and let herself cry. Not from sadness. From release. Because for the first time in years, she didn't feel broken. She felt whole. Later that week, Professor Elliott invited her to speak at a public seminar, an open forum where grad students and faculty presented their work. Grace was hesitant. "I'm not good at speeches," she said. "You don't have to give a speech," he said. "Just show them what you see." The room was packed. She stood at the front of room 304, now her classroom too. She took a deep breath, picked up the chalk, and began drawing a map of an idea she'd been working on for weeks, a new approach to understanding entropy in dynamic systems through topological flow. It was bold. Untested. But hers. When she turned to face the room, she saw something she never expected. People weren't confused. They weren't skeptical. They were listening. Grace looked down at the chalk in her hand. For years, this had been her secret weapon, her escape. Now, it was her voice. She cleared her throat. "When I was a little girl, I used to do math in my head while my mother yelled at me. It was the only thing I could control. Later, when I lost my son, I stopped thinking altogether. I thought I buried that part of me forever." She paused, heart pounding. "But math, this kind of thinking, it isn't just numbers. It's hope. It's how we try to make sense of the chaos. She looked at Elliot, who nodded once, proud. I don't know where this path leads, she said. But I know now that I'm not just walking it for me. Silence filled the room. Not out of awkwardness, but reverence. The applause started softly, then grew. Grace stood there, blinking back tears. For so long, she'd lived in the margins of life, erased like chalk from the board. But now, in the glow of the lecture hall lights, in the rustle of notebooks and warm hum of admiration, she had written herself into the story. And this time, she wasn't going anywhere. A year later, Grace published her first paper in a leading journal. It was titled, Order from Dust, a New Framework for Structured Chaos. She dedicated it simply. For Michael. You were the light. Now I carry it.